Hey everybody, James here from GMAT Ninja. I'm one of our MBA application consultants, and I'm joined here by Maria. Maria, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey everyone, I'm Maria Wickvila. I'm a 2005 graduate of Harvard Business School, and I have been helping people get into business schools for over 20 years now, which is scary and sad for me, but good news for you.
Exactly, and we're big fans here at GMAT Ninja of Applicant Lab, which is Maria's product and website, which we'll leave a link down to, and we'll leave a link to that in the description, and tell you a bit more at the end of the video. So, what are we doing in this video? Well, we're just reacting to a real MBA application essay sent in to us by a real student who are a hopeful candidate for their MBA program. The way this is going to work is in the video description, you're actually going to see a link, and that link gives you a PDF of a real essay that someone has submitted to us. Someone is very generous and brave and willing to have their work be reviewed and have us like kind of say what jumps out at us, how it can be improved for the application. So if you want to get the most out of this video, you actually want to press pause, go to that link, download the essay, just read it, because we're not going to be reading out the entire essay here. We're expecting that you've taken a look at this just like we have, and then we're going to react to this draft. We're going to identify the major strengths of this essay. We're going to name the major problems that we see, things that are holding it back, and then we'll actually offer some guidance to address those problems and hopefully get you a better chance at standing out in the crowd of applicants. Now, if you want to submit your own essay, that's awesome. We would love to do more of these videos. We'd love to get more feedback because working with real people with real essays is just super fun. And it's what we do. So we're also leaving a link to that in the description. You can submit your essay, tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll potentially select your essay for the next video. And your essay will be, of course, real work that you're working on, but all the essays in this video and any more that we make in this series are going to be anonymized. So yeah, we just want to avoid sharing any personalized information while still getting to work with real stuff. So Maria, thanks for joining. Big fan of your work. Really happy to have you here. We have both read today, actually 2 essays from the same applicant, and we're going to call this student who is in the UK, Sir Lancelot. And Lancelot is applying to Oxford University Saïd School of Business. A little bit of background on this candidate. They have a very, very solid GMAT focus score. So particularly great quant score in the high 80s. And this person doesn't necessarily have a business background. They've been working in engineering and product development for about a decade in the automotive industry. And this includes some big names. So I guess the highlights here, this person does have a global background. They started their career as an engineer in India, moved to the UK, have worked for some really major automotive companies, pretty impressive. But this is not necessarily an obvious business background. And the interesting thing about the Oxford University submission is they give you like multiple written responses. They don't call them all essays, but you do have to write like 4 or 5 answers to different questions. And I think it's great because it really like forces you to pinpoint your narrative and what you're trying to do at the school, why you're going, where you hope to go after. Whereas some other schools might leave that a little vague and you just kind of have to get the assignment. This just makes it very clear. So what we're going to do is look at 2 of the responses. The first one is describe your immediate plan after graduating from the MBA. And the second one is tell us something that is not covered in your application, which you would like the admissions committee to know about you. Much more open-ended. Let's start with this first prompt, Maria. So I'll do a very quick summary. I know, again, if you haven't read the essay, click that link, take a read, press pause, come back. But as a very, very quick recap, we have this first prompt. Describe below your immediate plan after graduating from the MBA. And Sir Lancelot here is kind of recapping some of their experience working in automotive, naming the companies they worked for, which are impressive, and then saying post-MBA, their goal is to gain experience in different industry domain projects, including business development, strategy, leadership, sustainable efforts. They want to go into consulting is where this ends up. And then there's 2 more paragraphs. The second paragraph kind of talks about what they'll get out of the consulting experience in that job, working for a company like Bain or BCG or one of the UK-based companies. And then a little bit about what they see at the Saïd School of Business that is meaningful to them. So I'll start right off by saying there's one clear strength here is that I like the paragraph structure. To me, it's clear like what the person is trying to do with each paragraph, and you're actually answering the question, right? So this is something that's very underrated. Just giving very easy to recognize answers to the question makes the reader's life a lot easier, because then they can actually evaluate like what you're saying instead of looking for like, wait, where are they answering the things that I'm asking for? So that's one strength that I noticed here. Maria, what was your first reaction in terms of like what can be improved?
Yeah, I think that the essay is off to a great start. I do, however, think that there are several suboptimal elements that could be improved to make it even that much stronger. So one of the first things that jumped out at me was that there really is not a clear long-term goal. The person goes into, I want to go into management consulting, and management consulting is going to give me all of these fantastic benefits. But I don't really know what that long-term destination is. And I think even though it's true that the question text itself does not state what is your long-term goal. It only says what's your immediate plan after graduating from your MBA. However, if there hasn't already been another place for the candidate to talk about their long-term goal, to state solely your short-term goal without then what's that long-term destination, it's like, well, why does consulting then make sense for that long-term goal? If I don't know what your long-term goal is, maybe consulting is the perfect job for you, or maybe it's a complete waste of your time. I don't know, because I don't know where you want to go in the long term. There's some vague language around, I want to create a positive impact in the world, mentions things like business development, strategy, sustainability. Those are all technically kind of three different, business development is more of a salesy role. Strategy can be more mergers and acquisitions, or, so it's sort of like throwing the kitchen sink, especially the word sustainability. That concept comes up a couple of times. And of course, we haven't seen this person's resume, but if this person has a background in sustainability, they need to sort of mention what that is. And that could be a good segue into that. If the long-term goal is, I want to continue working in automotive, but help make that industry more sustainable, then that's great. But sometimes I think there's a tendency for people to throw words like sustainability or diversity or equity, just because they're sort of hot buzzwords these days. But just because a buzzword is hot doesn't mean it applies to your candidacy. So the number one thing, if I could only make one change to this essay, is I would make a very clear long-term goal and then connect the dots between present, post-MBA, and then long-term after the MBA.
Yeah, this whole, like, what I'm hearing from you is something I totally agree with, which is just the importance of like being very specific and like, what are you trying to do? Like, what's the point really of your candidacy? And especially when you look at a stated, post MBA job you're trying to get of consulting, that's a big field. There are a lot of big companies and there's a lot of competition, right? So you have to think about who's on the other side of that desk, and right next to your application, if there are 20 to 50 other people, and some good percentage of them are going for the exact same general job, right? Whoever can jump out and just make a much more immediate, clear case for why this is their goal, how it lines up to the long-term vision, or their history and motivation. What is their journey and where does this fit into it, right? Whether it's before and especially leading after. If there's one thing I would change, it's in the same vein, but the thing that jumped out to me the most is the short-term goal of this is a very much a writing thing. When you tell someone my post-MBA goal is blank, like that's what you're saying. That you're telling them that's the goal. And when you have multiple things you're trying to do, that's confusing. And in this essay, the word post-MBA goal is linked to a bunch of very high-level buzzwords, Maria, like you pointed out. And the overall impression the reader gets is like, well, okay, so your goal is to gain experience in a bunch of stuff that kind of sounds cool and is kind of businessy. Now, we actually get very soon after that to what I think is the real goal. It's like, I want to become a consultant at Bain, or somewhere similar. And just, I would just say, go there, just go straight there and just say, this is the job I'm trying to get. Cause that's kind of really what they're asking for the short-term goal. And then you can free up all that extra space to do what Maria is saying, like expand your vision, connect the dots, give more specificity to like why this is your goal, where it leads to, and where you're coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that what this candidate can do is, one of the things that I teach my clients is like, try to read sentences and ask yourself, could any other candidate write this sentence? Mm-hmm. And so if you simply describe, I want to go into consulting because it will help me develop skills and expand my knowledge and learn from other consultants, like literally 100% of people who go into consulting could write that exact same sentence. So since this person has a strength in the automotive industry, lean into that. Make that the long-term goal, and also make that what you bring to the consulting firms yourself, right? Lots of people want to work in consulting, people from all kinds of pre-MBA backgrounds. And so when the firms are going to hire you, they're hiring you in part for your brain and your energy, but they're also hiring you in part for that pre-MBA experience or perspective that you bring to the table. So, for example, if this person, let's say they were leading teams or perhaps maybe indirectly managing projects or organizing things on some level having to do with, say, sustainability, and I'm just sticking on that because they mentioned it a couple times, then maybe tighten it around that whole story around, I want to go into sustainability consulting because in the long term, I want to run a car company and make it more sustainable.
Yeah, that's the really big missed opportunity I see in this draft, which is this person's been in the automotive industry in a meaningful way for a decade. And in this essay, I don't see the connection between that and the MBA. It just seems like you never want to come off as someone who just woke up and says, I don't like my job. Or maybe I made the wrong decision. Maybe I need to switch up, change up. But like you're not, that's not a very confident or rationalized vision. Now, if you have been in a specific industry accomplishing great things, and you've learned something about what is wrong or what's the opportunity you see because you are a business-minded person, because you are a leader, right? We need to hear that. And if you can make that connection, exactly like you're saying, right, to there are specialized roles in consulting, strategy consultants, all kind of consultants do have specialized verticals, specialized industry focus. Where's that connection? Is that something you want to do? I can't tell if it's something you want to do or if you're just trying to change your whole career. So we need to hear that story and see those dots connected.
Yeah, and I think that there's an opportunity, like you said, it's sort of a wasted opportunity, right? This person does have cool experience. And I think that they could also, with 10 years of experience, which is what I think this person has, that is a bit, quote unquote, too late, or at least on the later side, usually to apply to many MBA programs. Now, the good news is the European programs are usually more open to the older, more experienced candidates. And so it's a good thing that they're applying to Oxford. But, sometimes we can take a quote unquote perceived weakness in our background and turn that into a strength. So maybe you might say like, oh, well, this person's they're a little old, quote unquote, to be applying to an MBA, but maybe that 10 years of experience is actually going to benefit in some way. Like maybe they have more experience, like you said, maybe they've been in there long enough to see where where are those weaknesses in the industry because of that 10 years of experience. So try to turn what might otherwise be perceived as a weakness into a strength by focusing on the depth of your experience and the depth of your knowledge, and then making that as the foundation of then why I need the MBA and where I want to go from here.
Yeah, that really also just underscores what you said a bit earlier about, don't write it in a way where anyone else could have said the same thing, right? The more that it really lines up to your own journey, then the more it becomes your story. And that kind of applies also to the second paragraph here. I just want to make a quick note, because one thing that struck me about this is it's entirely about, I want to be a consultant, and here's all the great things that would be nice for me if I was a consultant. But that's not the point of the MBA. It's not to improve your life, right? I like it will by leaps and bounds, right? Once you get that education and you kind of go up into your career at the next level. But especially when you're making the case to get into a school, I think most of the readers want to hear, what impact are you trying to make? What contribution are you trying to make? And if you want to go into consulting, that's another place where when you're applying, that's very competitive. You have a lot of other people going for those jobs. So even at the employer level and the recruiting level, they're asking, well, what can you do for us? And we might as well just say that right now and set a vision for how you're going to make a difference there, perhaps with your automotive experience and what you can bring to the table.
Right. And if they're worried that the automotive experience might be a little too narrow or a little too niche, they can take a step back. And I think they tried to do a little bit. I've gained end-to-end product lifecycle experience in engineering and manufacturing. So perhaps make that the benefit, like make it a broader operations or manufacturing type of benefit that they bring to the firm. But yeah, I mean, the reasons for, not only is the second paragraph a little too egocentric and too generic, but also like, obviously this is why people go into consulting. I mean, consulting is usually the first or second most popular destination for MBA graduates, right? Depending on the school, it could be between 25 to 40% or more of the class goes into consulting. So you don't need to tell the reader like, hey, have you heard of this thing called consulting? It's a job. Get this. It's a job where you get to do stuff. Like, no, they've heard of it. They're familiar with it. So don't waste that precious word count, especially, if this, for the shorter essays with those really tight word counts, don't waste the reader's time telling them something they already know, or that any other candidate, literally 100% of other candidates, could write the exact same paragraph. And you could plop it into their essay and no one would be able to tell.
Yeah. And, keeping on the same, what's specific to you, I have a slightly even stronger take on this second paragraph. I would just get rid of it. Like you could go into what you would contribute as a consultant, but the big thing that I think I'm really curious about is just, why do you want to leave a very good career that you've spent a decade building for this other challenge? In short, that's missing. So if it's missing, why am I going to invest in this person making this big change? There are people out there who are working at Deloitte or who are working at Accenture, who already are consultants, and they're going to go apply for an MBA and say, yeah, I want to go work at Bain. And they're going to have a huge set of qualifications, as well as, hopefully, right, a much sharper kind of case for why it makes sense for them to make that leap. So if you're not going to do it on the basis of your contributions, just thinking about where you're coming from, right? Like, what was the catalyst for this decision? That's something I would really need to know if I want to root for this student. Yeah,
especially because they are applying it at a later phase in their life. Then presumably this must have been some sort of relatively recent, just like, oh my gosh, maybe I do want to get an MBA. Maybe I do want to go into consulting. Well, so tell us about that. Your specific, your specific journey. And yeah, get me rooting for you. If I know, again, going back to this idea of having a clear long-term vision, having a clear why. What's the ultimate reason you're doing all of this? You're going to take at least a year for Oxford. It's a year off work. You're going to spend quite a bit of money to get the degree, an investment that I think most of us would say is worth it, but still, that there's some sticker shock sometimes when that first tuition payment comes due. And so if I don't know why you're doing this, not only does the story kind of leave a lot of question marks over my head, but also I'm not going to root for you in committee. Right. So eventually what happens with these applications at many schools is at least one person, but usually two people will do an initial read through, and then they decide who gets an interview from there. And then after that, there's eventually a group of people who will sit in a room and say, okay, we've got 3 spots we're trying to fill today. We've got 8 potential candidates who could take those spots. I'm making these numbers up. But okay, let's go. Who should it be? Should it be this person or this person? And someone will be like, oh, did you see this engineer? Like, they have done such cool stuff and they are going to revolutionize sustainability and automotive, and we need that. Right. Versus just like the current one. I'm not really rooting. I'm sure you're a great person, but you're not giving me the fodder to then go into the arena and fight for you.
And that's kind of the good news. I think some people are hesitant to share some of that history because they're like, oh, but it's not relevant, or like they're afraid of saying the wrong thing. But it's just a blank right now is the bigger problem. And on the good news is, if it's a blank, then you have control over how you're going to fill that blank, right? What kind of narrative you're going to show. So it really is just, I really chalk it up to being a missed opportunity. Maria, what do you think about the last paragraph talking about what's great about the school?
So not only, we were previously critiquing that the candidate doesn't give enough specifics about themselves. In this final paragraph, not only does that trend continue, but there's really nothing specific to Oxford itself. It just sort of says like, yeah, Oxford's into people being ethical and responsible and global, and that's me. But literally every other business school, there's no such thing as a business school that's like, you know what, we're really into developing unethical leaders who are irresponsible and who are super provincial and closed-minded. That's what our business school is about. Like, no, every business school is like, oh yeah, we want people who are ethical and global and whatever. So there's literally nothing here that is specific at all to Oxford. I mean, honestly, again, you could replace, they SBS for the Saïd Business School. Yeah. You could literally plug in you could plug in Tuck, you could plug in Darden, you could plug in Ross, you could like any other school could easily fit in there. So it doesn't even look like this person took the time to research, well, what does Oxford offer, right? What are some of those specific things? And not only what is specific, but why does this specific offering make sense for me?
I would go even further, right? Even if the essay did give us more granularity on like, okay, here are some great things that you can do at Oxford. We're still in the world. This is very, very classic. I we spend so much time helping people nail this because it takes a lot of legwork. It takes, you can't take the approach of like, I'm going to write this school paragraph and just slap it onto every application. Because like, even if you get to the level of pointing out specific courses or specific clubs or specific things on a particular school, all that stuff is, easily Googleable. That's a fun word to say. All that stuff is also things they already know. So like, where have we added value? Right. I think, Maria, what you just said there about like, again, bringing it back to how does it relate to your specific journey, right? Your reason for getting the MBA, your goal after the MBA, your long-term vision. It's one thing to say, here's a bunch of great stuff about the school, even if it is specific for Oxford. And hey, oh, by the way, isn't that great? I love all that stuff. That's just kind of mashing a bunch of things together. Whereas if you can paint a clear picture of like, okay, let's say I have 1 year. What am I doing with that year? Can you help me understand what your life looks like for the next year? And you don't have to, we're not going to check up and make sure you did all those things. You're kind of demonstrating that you can actually set a vision, make a plan that is very sharp and tailored, right, to the goal for mission accomplishment and your own dream, and then follow through on that. And that we get invested in that vision of like, I can't wait till Sir Lancelot gets to Oxford and then does this and this and this, and that's going to make such a big difference, right, for our cohort.
Yeah, exactly. It's not simply an exercise in I know how to use Google, but I know how to actually think about I can think about in a thoughtful way. How's that for good writing? I can think about really like, what am I going to be doing with this degree? Not just that I found, an offering on global opportunities and threats, but tie that into, okay, well, what does that mean for me? Sustainability, climate change is a huge threat. So therefore, the offering on global opportunities and threats helps me because it will help me tackle this future global threat that I want to try to tackle. Like, it makes more sense. It's not only more satisfying and demonstrates a higher commitment to actually doing some work on your application, but why do schools even ask this in the first place? Well, because they know that once they accept you and they do send the tuition check and they're like, great, here you go. That first deposit, the first deposit's usually pretty small, but at some point you're going to have to spend, I don't know, 80,000 pounds or 100,000 pounds or whatever, that you don't go like, oh, wait a minute, I don't know if this is worth it. Right? You're trying, because that's what they don't want. They want a high yield number. They want that yield to be high, AKA the people that we let in, they all come here. As many actually enroll as possible. It's a vanity metric, and also it makes their lives a lot easier if they don't have to then go to the wait list and like, oh gosh, we offered all these people the spots and they all turned us down, and so now what do we do? And then let's go to, and it's very stressful for them. So the more it actually helps you get accepted, because you're making the point that like, if you let me in, I'm actually going to come, because I've thought about, I'm not going to balk at the cost. I'm not going to go like, whoa, wait a minute, maybe this isn't worth it. You're showing them that you've already made that decision, and so that it limits the possibility or the probability that you're going to be one of those difficult admittees.
So hopefully that's been helpful in terms of just our view. We really broke this thing down paragraph by paragraph. I guess as a final thought, I would just bring this all back to bad versus good, right? Bad or suboptimal is an essay where we never really understand who you are and why exactly you are coming to this school and what you're going to do after. And often this takes the form of people just like throwing multiple goals that they have, multiple kind of like high concept buzzwords that just confuse, right? And make it difficult to understand, wait, who is that person? What was the point of them getting their MBA? And then kind of slipping into saying lots of things that kind of sound good, right? Very positive, trying to kind of match made in heaven, right? This school and me, but never really explain the very unique journey that you are on, right? And why it matters that you have to go to this school at this time in order to accomplish a specific goal that no other student can name. Will it really be no other student? Probably not. But the more individualized your narrative is, and the more that shows up in your essays, then the better chance you have at being invested in, remembered, rooted for, and ultimately accepted. So we're going to take a look at this second essay now, part of the same application, right? This is for Oxford. tell us something that is not covered in your application, which you would like the admissions committee to know about you. I want to clarify, this is not like the optional essay, right? Where they say like, did you have anything else to say that you think is really important? This is just Oxford's way of giving someone, I mean, they name it as kind of their main essay. These other ones are masquerading, right, as like other written responses. So just want to make that clarification. Lancelot here chose to focus on basically personal life and their commitment to fitness and outdoor activities. So if you haven't read the essay, again, just take a pause, go to the link, read the essay. Maria, let's jump in here. What did you think was good about this draft, and what stuck out to you, what struck you as like a strength?
I like that the person talked about, there was a pretty good balance here of getting a sense of who they are outside of work. So not simply what their hobbies are, but also there's some leadership that is sort of hinted at, doing some fundraising, some good teamwork skills. So I think one of the things that we know about this candidate was that they might not have had a lot of leadership opportunities at work. And so to the extent that they can use some of these concrete examples of, maybe I play on a cricket team, therefore I'm a good team player. I've helped do, X and Y, therefore I do have some leadership potential, even though my job doesn't let me really demonstrate that. So I liked that it was sort of like a good balance of that. There was also, it's clear that they also have sort of a volunteer community mindedness to what they're doing. So it's not a huge volunteer activity, but at least it shows some sort of a mentality of thinking about others that might otherwise be missing from the other elements of the application.
Yeah, one thing I really like about it, similarly, it just is real. Everything here is super concrete, incredible, and I can see it happening in my head, right? And that's great. It's not just, when you say you signed up for the marathon and you fundraise for a specific person and raise 1,000 pounds, like that, okay, great. That is a real thing you did. And what have I ever done that? To be honest, I haven't. And so I just really appreciate when people just get right to the point. And it's like, hey, let me just tell you what I did. Let me tell you what, how I show up, what I commit to. And I have the receipts, right? So taking real action to help other people outside your career is just a great thing to call attention to. Maria, what are your thoughts on how we can improve on what this draft is showing?
So I think if we were to, let's say that we keep the content essentially the same. This is sort of a structural comment, but the concept, it sort of ping pongs back and forth between like, I do fitness stuff. I also donated bone marrow. And then I back to fitness, or cricket or something. So it's like it sort of ping pongs between kind of like hobbies that are physically related, and then this one very noble donation that they made, and then back to a cricket thing. So I would group them together thematically in terms of, okay, here's, I think they talk about weightlifting, running, and cricket, if I'm not mistaken. And so then let's sort of group those together. And you can highlight there, you can say like, well, the benefit of weightlifting is I do that. It gives me X and Y. The running, blah, blah, blah. And then cricket helps me with teamwork. So then that way I would just sort of consolidate those together so that thematically you're putting it all together. And then I would change the order, because the running, the raising of the money from the marathon, presumably I think it's related to the same cause for the charity, or somehow related to being a stem cell donor. So because the raising the money for the charity, I think it segues nicely into the stem cell donation. So I would just change the order, maybe do weightlifting, cricket, then running, and then you segue into it.
Creates kind of a flow of like your real experiences that initially were just for you, and kind of an evolution, right? It's like, okay, and this also, even if it's not strictly temporal, it still kind of presents a nice progression for the reader. If we're keeping the same content, essentially, I think there's a lot you can do with the framing. It's kind of like you've created a framing that is very broadly about being healthy and being fit and appreciating, right, life, appreciating fitness. But I think you could actually lean more into that and make it sharper, because that really does matter. Health really matters. People neglect their health all the time. And if you are, especially if you're less advantaged, we know that like you're gonna have a really hard time being healthy. So because there's some volunteer aspects, I'm really interested here, like, is it authentic, and is it possible for you to talk about being invested in keeping everyone healthy, right? Not just yourself, but realizing that like this is not something that everyone's so fortunate to have access to. So how in your free time have you been bringing that spirit and that investment to other people who maybe need some assistance or a donation or maybe some leadership, right? Some volunteer organizing. Is there an opportunity to make this more about leading and contributing as opposed to just enjoying fitness?
Yeah, I agree. I think it would be great for them to talk about, you know, hey, I love playing cricket, and therefore that helps me be a better team leader, for example, or a better teammate. I'd love to hear a story about something he did to be supportive of his teammates. That would be better than perhaps this sort of a laundry list of activities. And sort of moving on, the stem cell donation, or I was assuming it was bone marrow donation, because it said leukemia. You know, there's a couple of I get where the person there was a sentence or a phrase in here that I found a little bit kind of cringy, where it said, I made my life noble to help someone save their life. Like, a little too egocentric here. You're patting yourself a little too much on the back for, of course it's noble, but just because it was noble doesn't mean you have to say, look at how noble I am, everyone. I am so noble. It's just a little off-putting. And so I think I would not be so self-congratulatory about that. It risks coming off that way.
And perhaps it didn't even seem like that was the case when you were writing, right? But just to keep in mind, right? And especially if you have the ability to get feedback from readers, right? Other people who you feel safe sharing your stuff with, just like they can catch stuff like this. But definitely you want to be careful with that. I actually have a different, you just mentioned a phrase, which is laundry list.
I think it's three or four paragraphs. It's 4 little paragraphs. I would rather, one of the things I teach is this idea of primary evidence and supporting evidence. So you could quickly reference, you could say something along the lines of, physical fitness is not only great for me, but it's been a great way for me to help others. For example, I raised money and I did this, and then go into one, but the most impactful thing that has happened to me is when I was on a cricket team, and one of my teammates on the cricket team had this issue and I helped them. And then you really flesh out this one example of you being a leader, or you being a good team member, or you taking the initiative to contribute to someone else. I would rather, instead of having 4 small paragraphs, I'd rather have like one sort of quick introductory paragraph and then go into more details that really do show you being a leader. Like, this is sort of a cynical moment, but like when you say like, oh, I raised £1,000 for charity, I don't know if that means that you went to 200 people and got £5 each from them, or if you yourself just wrote a check for £1,000, right? So like a cynical reader, maybe this person did, they got 100 people at their office, they went cubicle to cubicle, desk to desk, and got 100 people to each donate £10. Wow. That, talk about persuasion, talk about taking initiative, like that is more impressive versus if it's like, yeah, well, secretly I just sort of wrote a check and that was my raising of the thousands. So I don't know that story. So I would love to know more this concept that I teach called the story behind the bullet point. So yeah, the bullet point is probably raised £1,000, ran a marathon, hooray. But what's the story behind that bullet point that really shows you being, that leader that takes initiative, that persuades others, that motivates others? That's I agree. I think that would be a better use of this space. You can still mention the other things in passing as supporting evidence, but yeah, help me really picture you as that leader or leader to be.
Yeah, and that is right. It is the best use of an essay, right? Really digging in and explaining how did it go down. And I think some people hit a wall here, right? Because they've kind of put down the accomplishment and they've measured the impact. And they're not used to actually storytelling. And they're not used to actually finding meaning in, well, first I set up a spreadsheet and then I made a list of all the people in the firm. I started doing phone calls. I gathered a meeting. Like, there are all these little things that seem kind of mundane. But if you actually walk yourself back through those steps, you can see what eventually pops out as like an actual journey that you took, that you did not have to, which made the result possible. And I've worked with people who are in this kind of situation, I guess, just to play devil's advocate. And we have these different stories to choose from. And I say, okay, well, can we pick one of these and like explain how it really is a moment of leadership and you taking charge? And then they say, nope. I don't think so. I think it was just 4 people gave this much money and that was it. And I don't want to lie. I don't want to misrepresent myself, which is true. You really don't want to do that. So I guess there are 2 things, not knowing more about the background here and how they arrived at this grab bag of stuff. I think it's always okay, if you have more time, to think about other stories you might think are not important, but are. I've had people who talk about taking care of a dying grandmother, or one of their grandparents passed away and they had to become the primary caregiver in their 20s for an elderly person in the family. And that really changed not their just their personal life, but like how they treated other people in the workplace. How did that impact them as a leader? That's not super obvious, right? As a way to show your leadership qualities. But if you find yourself trying to fill the blanks between the bullets and all you have is kind of another way of saying the bullet, or just like, you're not really getting to the story that you feel is authentic, you can look for other stories. And that's something that I work with people a lot on, is just really trying to find the meaning. But if we're going back to, I guess, Maria, what your main point is here, and I totally agree. At the very least, you can move away from listing a bunch of different activities and just ask yourself, like, what can I build here with a single one of these experiences that leaves more of a lasting impression and gives someone essentially a little movie to watch in their head, right? Of this maybe not 1000% unique story, but very impactful and memorable way of giving back to the community.
Yeah, it'll be more satisfying and more memorable, for sure.
Well, that is it for these 2 essays in this application. Hope this was helpful. Maria, I guess wrapping up for this second essay, do you have any final, I guess, big picture guidance to give for folks who might be looking at similar challenges and what we've learned here?
Yeah, I think ask yourself, like, what's the point I'm trying to make with this essay? And if this candidate is thinking to themselves, okay, I don't really have a lot of work leadership, but I do have some interesting things that I've done outside of work that point towards me being someone who takes initiative and has all these other positive attributes, then ask yourself, like, how do I best convey that I have those positive attributes? Like, where do I elaborate on what those positive attributes might be? As a very random side note, like, think about, well, if like, for example, if Oxford has a cricket team and it ends up, let's say the story ends up being about cricket, that could also be a good, if you've got 2 equally good stories, it doesn't happen often, but if you truly have 2 like very, very equally good stories, maybe secretly pick the one that, if the Oxford Business School has a cricket team, maybe that's the one you pick, because that way, in my mind, I'm also picturing you indirectly coming to my campus and joining that team, and then contributing to my community. It's not just that you've contributed to someone else's community in the past, you'll contribute to my community when you're a student here. It's a very subtle point, but something to also to think about. But the main thing to focus on is trying to portray yourself as a leader with numerous positive qualities that leaders need.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, Maria, thanks so much for joining. And we really have to thank the student known as Sir Lancelot on this video.
Godspeed, Sir Lancelot, Godspeed.
Thanks so much for, being open to having your essay shared. And we hope that this advice helps you improve, helps you prepare for that application to Oxford. And for anyone else who is looking for help with their MBA applications, with their essays, if you want to work with me as your MBA consultant, all you have to do is go to gmatninja.com/MBA-admissions. I'm sure you will find it. Maria, how can people plug in, use Applicant Lab and ask for your help?
Yeah, absolutely. So applicantlab.com, it's a self-paced online course filled with interactive exercises and videos where I basically take my 20 years of experience and I condense it into a DIY platform that you can follow yourself. So if you like the way how I break things down in this video, you're going to love Applicant Lab, because it's more of that. I take all of the major schools' essay questions, I dissect them, I put them under a microscope, and I teach you how to best portray yourself.
All right. Well, if you're watching here, please leave us a comment. Tell us how the video is helping you think about your own MBA application. Just give us your feedback. Remember, if you want to submit your essay to be a part of this ongoing series where we react and review real MBA application essays, there's a link in the description. We'd love to hear from you, and hopefully we'll be able to talk about your work on the channel soon. Thanks, Maria. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Take care.